All right, everyone, we're on the digestive system now. I've got it here in front of you. Let me see if I can make this a little bit larger without screwing anything up. All right, so the digestive system is made up of two parts. One is the gastrointestinal tract, GI tract, and then the other one is accessory organs. So the gastrointestinal tract is one tube. And so if you follow the mouse cursor, it comes down the esophagus and then it goes into the stomach. The esophagus is just a hallway to get you from the mouth to the abdomen where everything happens, right? So the real estate of the thorax here is taken up by the heart and the lungs. So we want to get the food past that into the abdomen. The stomach breaks down the food. So you might look here and say, well, the stomach is shaped a lot differently than the esophagus, and that's very true. But it's still the same tube that goes from the esophagus to the anus, right? So it goes from here to here. It's just that in the case of the stomach, it's been stretched out. The small intestine have a different shape. Large intestine has a different shape, but it's all one tube going from the mouth to the anus. So there's the GI tract, and then there's accessory organs that help with digestion, but they're not part of the GI tract. There's three up in your mouth. There's your salivary glands, your teeth, and your tongue. And then down here in the abdomen, we have the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. You can see some of it here, but it's underneath the stomach there. So just wanted to show you that really quickly. So let's go through, how would a piece of food go through the GI tract? What organs is it going to go through, and what are the functions of these organs? Some would say that, most would say that that digestion begins with what we call the cephalic phase, and I'm in this middle sentence paragraph thing here. The cephalic phase is just, the thought of food or the smell of food or somebody mentioning food, then you might start to salivate. And then all of a sudden you notice that you're hungry, right? Your stomach muscles start to growl. Or they start to churn, right? And that's a growling of your stomach. That's the cephalic phase, right? So it could start even before you've begun eating, right? But let's talk about eating. So you put the food in your mouth, you chew it up. The idea is that we're going to turn this food into a bolus. So a bolus is, it's a mass of something. In the case of the digestive system, it's chewed up food that we're going to swallow. Right? And so as you're chewing the food, you're mixing the saliva in with it. And the saliva has a couple of enzymes in it. And one that I'm mentioning in particular here is amylase. And so just to review, what do enzymes do? Nothing happens in your body without an enzyme. So you don't make anything and you don't break anything down without an enzyme, right? So enzymes, in this case, in the digestive system, they break up food. Technically, they speed up a reaction. So in this case, we're talking about amylase, and amylase breaks up starch. It doesn't technically break up starch. It speeds up the breakup of starch. But realistically, without the enzyme amylase, it would take 2 years to break down the starch. That's not going to happen, right? So the enzyme makes that happen in a couple of minutes. So I should clarify what we mean by breakdown, because there's two ways to break down your food. One way is mechanically or like to physically break up your food, like what your teeth do. And then another way is chemical breakdown. So if you were to drink, liquid like Ensure or something like that, that's liquid, so it's already been physically broken down. But you still have to chemically break down the molecules. They're too large to be absorbed. So in the case of starch, starch needs to be broken down into eventually glucose so that it can go into your blood. So liquid starch is too big to be absorbed. And that's what these enzymes are doing. So amylase is an enzyme that it's in your saliva. It's in another place in your body as well. We'll get to that. But it's breaking up the food chemically. And then we swallow the food. So then it ends up in your esophagus. So now your esophagus, along with the rest of your gastrointestinal tract, have layers of muscle built into them. Right? So all of our organs have smooth muscle, and our GI tract is no exception. So the esophagus has smooth muscle in it, and so does the stomach, and so do your intestines. So if you look at the esophagus, there's muscle running long ways, like up and down the esophagus. So we call that longitudinal. And then we have muscle that circles around the esophagus. So we're calling that circular. So there's a longitudinal layer of muscle. There's a circular layer of muscle. They're going to alternate in their contractions and kind of push the food through your esophagus. So we call that peristalsis. So that's that last word right here. So peristalsis is the alternating of contractions. It's like the wave-like movement that your gastrointestinal tract makes to help push the food along. So the food is gonna go through the esophagus into the stomach. Now take a look here, right between this brown and this pink. Actually, I've got that covered in another slide. So let me just go to it. So first, let's talk about the stomach. The food's going to drop into the stomach, right? It goes from the esophagus, and it's going to drop into the stomach right here. And the job of the stomach is to liquefy your food, or it's like almost liquid. It's like a slushy drink. I don't know why I just say slushy drink. It's a slush. And we call that chyme, C-H-Y-M-E. Right? So chyme is like this slushy consistency, almost liquefied, and that's what the stomach is doing. And so how does it do that? Well, first of all, the stomach juice is very acidic, right? If we're on a pH scale from like 0 to 14, the lower the number, the more acidic it is, right? And so the stomach has a pH of around 2. Normally, that would cause damage to our cells, to the lining of the stomach. But the stomach is lined with mucus, with a thick layer of mucus to protect the stomach from the acid. And so these cells at the bottom here, these mucus cells, those are cells in the wall of the stomach. They make the mucus layer. Right? So we have mucus cells that make the mucus that protect our stomach. We have parietal cells, which make the acid, hydrochloric acid. And that's what's going to physically break up the food. And then we have another enzyme in the stomach as well. So there's these chief cells that make something called pepsin. So pepsinogen is like an inactive form of it, but pepsin is an enzyme that breaks down protein. And if we have an enzyme that breaks down proteins, they usually need to be made inactively. So pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down proteins that's made in the stomach. Usually the stomach's too acidic for most enzymes. Pepsin's an exception to that. So let's get back to this, the end of the esophagus and the beginning of the stomach. So right here, we're looking at where the green meets the red. Right about there, and not really marked here, but it's called the cardiac sphincter. Yeah, I put it at the top here. So it's like a ring of muscle, it's like a closed fist, and it opens up, lets the food through, and then it closes back again. So the food's coming down the esophagus, the bolus. It's going to, the cardiac sphincter is going to open up, it's going to drop, the food's going to drop into the stomach, then it's going to close again. And you want that to close because you don't want any of that acid going back up into the esophagus. Remember, the stomach has a layer of mucus protecting it. The esophagus doesn't. So that's going to start to burn your esophagus after a while, And that's what heartburn is, or gastric reflux. It's getting past the cardiac sphincter, going back up into the esophagus. We have a sphincter on the other side as well, right? Where the blue is meeting the whatever color orange, right? That's called the pyloric sphincter. That's not to prevent backflow. That's to slow down the stuff from the stomach going into the intestine because it's acidic. You don't want to just dump the acidic contents of the stomach into the small intestine. That's going to it's going to burn a hole in your small intestine. So this first part of the small intestine we call duodenum or duodenum. So we're going to cause a duodenal ulcer, right? So there's no mucus protecting the duodenum or the beginning part of the small intestine like you have in the stomach. So you want to just let a little bit through, half a teaspoon at a time. So that's why we have another sphincter or valve, which we call the pyloric sphincter, and that's going to open up, let just a half a teaspoon through, and then it's going to close up again. So now we're at the level of the small intestine. And the small intestine, this is where all the absorption is going to happen. This is where amino acids from the proteins are going to be absorbed into your blood. This is where glucose that was part of the carbohydrates, this is where it's going to be absorbed into the blood. And this is also where chemical breakdown happens. So the intestine is a place where chemical breakdown happens, and it's designed to absorb the energy from our food, vitamins, minerals, energy, things like that. So how is it, what is so special about the small intestine that it's able to absorb all this stuff? Well, if you look at the wall of the intestine, it's not flat. There's these little fingers, a bunch of fingers coming in, and each one of those fingers is called a villus, or plural, we could say villi. So there's a bunch of villi in there, and those are increasing the surface area of the small intestine. The more surface area you have, the more chance for absorption. So if you think about what has more land per square mile, flat or hilly land, right? Land with hills have more actual dirt per square mile than a flat area, right? So it's kind of like that. So the villi increase the surface area. There's microvilli, so each one of these cells have little villi on them as well. So let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. All right. So each one of these rectangle things is a cell. And what's going to happen is here's where all your food is, and glucose, for example, is going to squeeze in between these cells and go into your bloodstream. But each one of these cells have little villi on top of them. So we're going to call those microvilli. They're really tough to see. You can't even see those. You can see the villi. With a simple microscope, we could definitely see the villi. But we cannot see the microvilli. So we call that the brush border because it kind of looks like a brush. But anyway, the microvilli also increase the surface area of the small intestine. So we have a dramatic increase of surface area. But also, the small intestine is designed in a way that forces the chyme to go in a circular motion, right? Because you don't want, it's probably going to be a bad analogy, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, if the liquid's flowing through here, you don't want it to just be at the bottom here, and none of the chyme, the liquid's at the top. So as it goes through, it has to go around. So all parts of the intestine, the top and the bottom, get a chance to absorb nutrients. So that's what circular folds do. So there are some accessory organs that are associated with the small intestine, at least the first part of it, the duodenum or duodenum. And so we have the liver, the gallbladder and the pancreas. So the liver makes bile. Bile makes big drops of fat smaller. They have to be made that way so that the enzyme lipase can go in there and break it down. So that's going back to the chapter on lipids, right? So the liver is constantly making it, but it's not. We're not constantly needing it. So when we don't need it, we store it in the gallbladder, and then you can see this little tube right there that's going down into the intestine. The pancreas, right here, kind of hidden behind the stomach, but they're kind of showing it to you here. The pancreas is making something called bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, which is actually like an antacid, right? Just like baking soda is an antacid. This is like your body's baking soda. So it's an antacid. It's going to come through this tube right here, and it's going to meet the acid, and it's going to buffer the acid and make it less acidic, which is very important, right? You need that. But additionally, the pancreas makes enzymes. And so I've written just 3 of the many enzymes that the pancreas makes. Amylase, and the substrate of amylase, meaning what does that enzyme work on? Amylase works on starch. It breaks down starch. You remember it was in your saliva also. So here it is again. Lipase breaks down lipids. We learned that when we talked about the chapter on lipids. And then I just picked one of the many enzymes that break down proteins, trypsin. And then there's 3 enzymes that are made by the microvilli that break down disaccharides. And I don't know if you remember from chapter 2, but there was 3 disaccharides: sucrase, lactase, maltase. So the sugars are named sucrose, lactose, maltose. The enzymes are the same word except with an A. So sucrase breaks down sucrose. Lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. Right? So someone that's lactose intolerant, they don't produce enough lactase. So the lactose doesn't get broken down. And if it doesn't get broken down it cannot be absorbed. So that's what the bloating and stuff from people that are lactose intolerant, that's why they're bloating, or that's why they're feeling uncomfortable, because that lactose is not getting broken down into glucose to be absorbed, because your body's not making the enzyme. So we've got 6 enzymes here. So this is the last part. So the small intestine is going to absorb a good deal of all the nutrients, carbs, lipids, proteins. Of course, those you have to break down further, and then vitamins, minerals, water. Then this chyme, all this liquid stuff that went into the small intestine, now it's leaving the small intestine and it's going into the large intestine. And you can see how the large intestine, it ascends and then it like transverses, then it descends, and then there's a thing here, we call this like a sigmoid. Looks like half of a sigma, like that thing in math. All right, so the job of the small intestine is to reabsorb about 80 to 90% of the water. So the longer that chyme is going to stay in the large intestine, the more water is going to get sucked out of it. Or if it goes through too quickly, it's going to be all liquid, right? That's diarrhea. So that's why diarrhea is like an issue with people like chronic, like having it a lot, is because your stomach's donating water to liquefy your food, but you're not getting it back on the other end. You're not getting it back inside your large intestine. It's going through too fast. So too much diarrhea, you can get dehydrated from that, especially if you're younger. So there we go. That is a quick rundown of the digestive system. Please also don't forget, you should be looking at these PowerPoints and reading the chapter. So let me know if you have any questions.